Well, I just got seen a video about the failure of the Great Jedi, and it talked about the aspects of the Great Jedi, the Jedi, and the Sith. And I noticed there's something wrong with the aspects this fellow was talking about, because after seeing the movies and the cartoon series, and I know some of it's canon, some of it isn't, so I'm gonna focus on the canon stuff and not the legend stuff, if possible. Whenever Star Wars was originally created, the Jedi's were supposedly the keepers of peace and used their abilities to keep balance in the Force and prevent the Sith from ruling the galaxy. Back then, balancing the Force meant uh, stopping the Sith from using the Force for their own gain. My guess is in the first three episodes, the original episodes, Jedi were basically people who would appear and fight the Sith whenever they appeared and then disappear back into the shadows. It was expanded upon in the prequels and the Jedi's were basically real. They were real knights, basically serving the Republic as knights would in a castle, and their kingship. Their lordship. Sorry. Um, and the philosophy somewhat changed, balancing the Force, because you notice there's a whole bunch of Jedi and only two Sith at the time in the three prequels. And that's when the balance of the Force took on a whole different meaning, because as they discussed, especially in the third film, what the prophecy meant to them. And this basically changed the whole aspect of what balance of the Force meant. Because one could look at balancing the Force as there's too many Jedi, thus the light side is too strong, and there being two Sith, um, the dark side is disappearing, so the Force is balancing out by lowering the numbers of the Jedi. So there's only an equal number of Jedi left. By the Revenge of the Sith, this is the case. There are two Jedi and there are two Sith by the end of the series, by the end of the prequels. So there was a balance of the Force for a time. Then by episode 3, aka episode 6, Luke Sidious is killed, and there's only one Sith left and one Jedi left, and that's Luke and Vader. But Vader dies, so the balance is off again. So one can interpret the balance of the Force means from the first three films that the Sith are imbalancing the Force by using the Force in ways it's not supposed to, or if you go by the prequels, the balance of the Force is basically the number of Jedi and Sith who wield the dark side and the light side. I think it's supposed to be, to me, the second, not the first, because if the Sith can't ultimately be destroyed, they'll always come back. If Sidious is a indication that there's always a Sith in training, there will always be a Sith. But unless Luke knows there's a Sith out there, he's going to keep to himself and most likely not pass his teachings on, because he believes all the Sith to be gone. This is one of the things about the rule of two. They basically keep in the shadows until it's time to strike. But where does the Great Jedi fall in this? And now I'll expand upon the cartoon series. As there was a son, a daughter, and the father. Excuse me if I forget their names. I remember seeing the episode, just don't remember names. And there's God, there's a little creature I saw. Oh, well, actually, a huge creature. I forgot his name, but he's the guy that says, "I'm in the middle." Bengi or something like that. Um, it's believed that Great Jedi are empathetic. No, that actually is what the Jedi are. Let me explain the philosophy of Jedi. The Jedi is supposedly supposed to be selfless, and the Sith are supposed to be selfish. This is actually not true. In fact, both, from my observation, both Jedi and the Sith are selfish. As is explained even in that video, both the Jedi and Sith hoard knowledge and keep it to themselves. They are not willing to train people who do not follow the philosophy. So that's very selfish. Jedi are supposedly selfish because they're not into material wealth. Never mind, they live in temples that are very lavish and are able to keep a hoard of knowledge within those temples. They live comfortably in those temples, just as the Sith live comfortably in when they take power. It's no different. They have to be getting public funding too. And just as the Sith, when Sidious became emperor, he was getting public funding. Same thing with the Jedi Order. They have to get public funding to run that temple. They're not doing this on donations. Especially how their temple looks. It looks very clean. So the Jedi and the Sith live basically similar lives. They're not detached from their surroundings. In fact, the Jedi are attached to each other. This is proof when Obi-Wan sees his master die in the first movie, Qui-Gon Jinn. He becomes enraged for a moment there. He may not have gone full Sith, but he was attached to Qui-Gon Jinn, which makes me believe that every Jedi is attached to each other. They may not be attached to the whole world, but they are attached to each other. They have shown to get angry, and they have shown to have their own ideas about how to save the universe. Even Count Dooku not only got mad when he found out his student Qui-Gon Jinn died, but he also felt that the Order needed to take a more active role. So the Jedi will always be attached to their outside world. The problem is the Jedi try to keep to themselves, and they can't do that. You also can't take any political positions as a Jedi, even a diplomat, without getting yourself involved. If you become a diplomat, that means you favor a government. You're not just favoring, whether you favor peace or not, doesn't matter. Once you jump into the middle of something, you are going to end up getting involved. This shit goes south. And this is what happened in the first three movies. They got involved. And I think one of the things that makes the Jedi fall more so than the Sith is that their arrogance. Yes, even Sidious was right about Yoda. His arrogance blinds them. They couldn't see that the Sith was right in front of them because they believe the Sith to be more of an external than an internal threat. They would have never expected that the Sith would infiltrate their politics and change the Republic to an empire. He didn't think the Sith were that smart, or at least not that cunning. They believe the Sith just to be terrorists. Just the same way we see in real life, we see certain groups of people as terrorists or thugs or criminals. So too, they are blind to the fact that their own people can be this way. I think it was in 1945, the Japanese were put in internment camps because they thought they could be spies or assassins for Japan, when in actuality, if there were any spies in America, it would have been white people, not to be racist, but the Japanese would have had a better time influencing one of the white soldiers to give them intel than a Japanese one, because they know a Japanese one would not be able to get close, get that much power, get close. And this is the same way with the Jedi. They believe the Sith to be an external. the people on the outside, and um, they can't trust outsiders. When the reality was that the Sith they were looking for was right in front of their face. So, and yes, I know people are going to say, "Well, it's not Yoda's fault." I understand that he couldn't. He's not a god. He can't see everything. It's just that they did not take the time to rationalize and think about where the Sith were really coming from, and how the Sith had so much knowledge of what was going on. At least their leads would have pointed towards the capital, and it was pointing towards the various politicians, but they would have known something was up, and that possibly one of the politicians was a Sith, but they did not take the time to do that. Again, they thought the Sith were basically either destroyed, or they thought the Sith weren't smart enough to be this dangerous. And it's because of their apathy and their need to be detached from everything and not be attached to everything, and not to be attached to everything, is why they could not sense it nor reflect on it. They just simply brushed it off. And that seems to be another main theme of the Jedi, is they just brush things off. Yeah, it's good to brush things off if you don't want to keep getting mad about something, but eventually, if you brush off too much, you're at the point of just being naive, which again is why the Jedi fell and did not see themselves being ambushed. On the other hand, the Sith are equally blind because they believe themselves to be invincible. A big showcase of this is Anakin versus Obi-Wan and how that ended. They believe themselves to be invincible and can take on anything so long as they put their faith in their emotions as opposed to their empathy like the Jedi. And while it does fuel their force abilities and their skills and makes them very powerful, ultimately they're no more better off than the Jedi because, again, they get tunnel vision. And after reading about a lot of, I know this goes a little off the what I'm talking about, but when I looked at the various Jedi versus Sith and Sith versus Sith and Jedi versus Jedi battles that people have put on YouTube, I noticed when they talk about the personalities of certain characters, the Sith often have tunnel vision and often do not see, and their downfall is often due to the fact they're not seeing any patterns or strategies, which is also shown in the cartoon series and the movie series. They often are blinded and think they can just rip through something or just simply demolish everything that gets in the way. And many times throughout the Sith careers, that's never the case. They can be outsmarted, and I think the problem with the Sith philosophy is not that it's emotional. It's the fact that it caters to negative emotions, and it causes its users to get tunnel vision. They can't see the bigger picture. And while the Jedi can see the bigger picture, they can't see what led up to the bigger picture. In other words, the Sith can see the small details, but not the bigger picture, and the Jedi can see the bigger picture, but not the small details. So, and this is where the Great Jedi comes in. A Great Jedi is not empathetic who just sits on the sidelines. A Great Jedi is someone who has learned to master their emotions. And that's the biggest misconception of what a Great Jedi is. They're not people who sit on the sidelines and do nothing. Even if you go with EU Luke, he was using some Sith techniques. Luke, instead of just being a total Jedi, was a Great Jedi who learned to embrace both his emotions. Although he tended to favor the light side, he learned to truly balance himself. And this is where my other theory of what balancing the Force means. It's not just balancing the Force on how many Sith are supposed to be on the battlefield and how many Jedi are supposed to be on the battlefield, or preventing the Sith from messing up the Force. I think what balancing the Force means is actually a quote towards oneself, meaning the the Force users are supposed to learn how to master themselves, and that's what a Great Jedi is. Someone who learns to master his negative and positive emotions to fuel their techniques and Force abilities. Someone who can basically balance their emotions is a person who will be a force to be reckoned with. Not only would you have access to Sith abilities, but Jedi abilities as well. You could talk someone down and to peacefully, or if things went bad, you could just simply incinerate a room as you saw fit. The thing about a Great Jedi is more about not having any qualms about how you use your abilities. I know it sounds like it's going to Sith territory, but not quite. It's not having any qualms about your actions, but your abilities. In other words, now I've always said this. Let me talk about the X-Men right quick. Not Magneto, and not Xavier, because he would be a bad example of this, but Magneto basically wants mutants to not feel bad for being who they are. It's one thing that he wants mutants to be superior to humans, but his number one philosophy is to embrace themselves as mutants, whereas Charles Xavier wants mutants to learn to live in a human world when they don't really have to. I've always said Magneto was right, because mutants are the superior race because they can do things humans can't. And they were basically built to survive, unlike humans. And that's where I compare this to what a Great Jedi is. It is someone who's come to embrace who they are. They are Force users, and they have the Force, and they can do as they please. I'm not saying they should do what Sidious did and take over the galaxy, but I'm also not suggesting doing what the Jedi did and detach themselves from the surroundings. Rather, they need to be involved in their surroundings and use their abilities as they feel comfortably using. In other words, as I was saying, if he's a diplomat, use your powers to diplomat, but if the shit goes sour, then use your Force abilities to render the situation impudent, so nothing else will happen. So if you're a Great Jedi and you try to negotiate a hostage situation, if it could be settled with diplomacy, cool. That means you don't have to use too much effort. But if the hostage situation goes south, you can easily choke out everyone in the room, rather than just passively waiting for someone to react, because this could get a lot of people killed. As I said, Jedis can see the bigger picture here. They can't see the small details. And the small details here is if they don't do anything or react quick enough or hastily enough, somebody's going to die. And yes, that's part of the Force, but if you put more effort to it, it shows that you're not completely selfish. Because it's not about being the morally right, it's about doing the morally right. And this is where Jedis often are blinded and think they're doing the morally right, because they're more worried about doing the right steps that leads up to the right decision, as opposed to doing the rational thing. And Sith are not rational by any means. As I said, they're emotional. Moreover, they focus on negative emotions. As I said, they can see the small details, just not the bigger picture. So a Great Jedi can not only see the small details, but he sees the bigger picture as well. He knows that if he doesn't react in a swiftly manner and take these guys out, that person's going to die. A Jedi would see this too, but the Jedi is more inclined about keeping the balance and not acting hastily, because they want to preserve the life of both the hostage and the hostage takers. Whereas a Great Jedi would preserve the preserve the hostage, would save the life of the hostage, but possibly kill the hostage takers. Because either way, those hostage takers are going to meet a very bad end. If the Great Jedi doesn't kill them, they're going to go to prison and possibly be killed. And not everybody who goes to prison reforms. And that's all I have to say on that.